Hey aspirants, welcome to Insights I Can initiative. So thank you so much for watching the previous video and helping us with your recommendations that you would like the analysis of the book. So we will slowly do it in this manner where from Monday onwards we'll be uploading the video by 10:30 in the morning, and the last segment of every video will contain one chapter of the book. So if we make it a single video it would not be interesting, so let us make sure that in every episode's ending we have a small chapter of the book of Mr. Ramchandra Guha that will be useful from exam perspective being uploaded. Fine. So we'll go to the first topic today. So this is a kind of question for all of you to think over. Tech giants, are they ruling the world currently? Lessons for India to save her democracy. So tech giants, in the sense, those companies which have prospered with the idea of internet and digital devices being popular amongst the world, and how these companies today have turned into not only the entities that are money making but also those who are entering into many political arenas as well. So there was an incident that recently took place in Brazil, and most of you would have read it in The Hindu and other newspapers. So if you see, the Brazilian leader, his wife, and the judge of the Brazilian court were in one group who tried to criticize the chairman or the head of X, that is the former Twitter, Mr. Elon Musk. So, as we know, these social media giants at times have to abide by the rules made by the countries to make sure the government will have proper law and order management. So, this X company in Brazil was not abiding by certain rules, upon which the court put a huge fine on the company. The company refused to pay the fine, and the court gave a verdict to ban the media channel entirely in Brazil, in which there's a huge amount of share or huge amount of members who are participatives in that. So this enraged the CEO of X, who made a very controversial statement and told that we will see to it that next time when you contest in election you will not be winning the election. So the statement, though was a kind of threat told, it is deepening the idea of how these tech giants with their economic power and various other tools are able to topple governments or even are confident about managing the elections or changing the results of that. So this brings to a big question, as in what modus operandi they have been using, and is this a new era of colonialism by any chance? So, if we ponder the question, this article is based on editorial in Deccan Herald, East India Companies of the Tech World, where the author compares the East India Company of the British, how it conquered India, and comparing it with the present social media giants. So currently, what was the idea of East India Company? It conquered the world. It conquered India for 100 years. That is, it took 100 years for East India Company to take control over the economic and political ideas of India, then start ruling the country. But when you take the tech giants like X or take Meta, any of them, they have huge leverage. And look at the terms used here. They can make any codes or algorithms and can bring changes just by click of a button and sharing the clips meant for a specific purpose. So we can tell the three C's to rule the world currently, according to the social media giants, is code, click, and clips. So do remember them in your answers. And what are the ideas they are implementing? If you remember, East India Company, it used divide and rule policy. It tried to break the already existing institutions like monarchy in India. It tried to instigate violence between the people. Don't you think the similar things are achieved using the same threes here, that is dividing people on various grounds? We can talk about inflicting violence through these videos and clips, and also there is an attempt to break down the institutional setup in countries. So these are the three dimensions of code, click, and clips. So coming to the next important aspect, when Brazil has been threatened in this manner, what are the lessons in store for India? Or we can tell what are the challenges India needs to be wary about. The first one being the threat to the country's sovereignty challenged by these companies, that is the tech companies challenging the sovereignty of a country by questioning the way the government is functioning. And if you see, sovereignty has been one of the basic elements since our preamble, and Indian government has never allowed the erosion of the sovereignty, but the current tech giants are being a threat to that. So don't you think, are we going to an era of digital colonialism? It is an era of digital colonialism. So the countries and the governments needs to be very careful on how the data of the citizen is parted, how we manage or give permits to them, how we control these companies, and that is the aspect that we need to focus on. And what are the instruments that India needs to be careful about? The instrument is, these companies are trying to capture the minds of the public and feed insecurities to them, telling that if you don't this, your government will do this. So these kind of insecurities are making people victim to the games played by the tech giants and the algorithms developed by them. And why all this is happening, the major reason is there is no transparency in the functioning. So due to lack of transparency, we do not know how these companies are operating. Their whole structure is quite opaque, keeping the lawmakers out of it. But the last one is the most important one here. It is the role of domestic political parties. So the domestic political parties, for example, the author here has spoken about some certain leaders in the country hiring the Pegasus software to spy over the opposition members. But here the paradox is, the people who have hired the software do not know that they are also being spied using their data in many social media platforms. So when these political parties go hand in glove with such tech giants, the idea of sovereignty is definitely threatened. So we should be very wary about these kind of changes. At the same time, when we get questions like, is colonialism ended? Let's say, especially from essay perspective, or if we talk about the new dimensions of colonialism in GS paper 1, world history and all of them, remember to give the idea of neo-colonialism. This was done through many multinational companies. Now the idea is digital colonialism. So please update these aspects in your GS1 notes, right? So any algorithm can be used to create fake news, and we have already seen election results are, especially the countries that went to election in 2024, using many AI tools and algorithms, fake news have the power to change the results of many elections. So algos anytime is a title used in the article. Then the question that we need to think for, how can democracy be guarded and strengthened in an age when creating a riot is as easy as posting on X, or silencing a voice is as easy as blocking an account? Please think over it, because we often have conversations with respect to article clause 1 is important, or article 19 clause 1 or 19 clause 2, where we talk about reasonable restrictions. So what are these reasonable restrictions to which X like platforms need to be abide by? They are telling we defend freedom of speech and expression, but when unrestricted, the same freedom can go on to hamper the rights or responsibilities of others in the society. So remember to give this dimension of digital colonialism in your essays to make them very interesting. So coming to the next topic, which is again based on an editorial in Deccan Herald, we have often got questions in our UPSC mains with respect to the topic justice. So despite the provisions of justice being covered in our constitution, judiciary being active defenders of justice, we also see that laws are beautifully made to provide justice to the public. Then why is justice not reaching the last mile? When we get any questions like this, the idea of intersectionality is extremely relevant. Okay, so what is the meaning of intersectionality? So it is basically an idea with respect to identity of a person. So let's take the case of a person in India. they are first categorized based on their gender, that is they're either male or female. And when it comes to caste identity, a person is either a Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, or Dalit, or ST we can talk about. When it comes to religion, we have most of the religions in the world being practiced in India. And when it comes to class identity, there are some sections of society which are rich and some which are poor. So the meaning of intersectionality is, so if the weakest segments among all of them gets united, that would make the life of a person more and more difficult. So we'll quickly look into the meaning of this. So this term in intersectionality was coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw in her book. So if you see her story, she is not only a woman from a weaker gender according to the societal norms, but also belong to a different race in the US society, which is always discriminated upon. So she is not only facing issues in her life because she's a woman, she is also facing issues because she is a black woman. So a white woman may position in the society may be comparatively better compared to a black woman's position. At the same time, a white man's position in the society may be the best compared to the black man, because though he is a man, the idea of being from a inferior race in the US society is something which will reduce their opportunities in improvement. So though we don't have this idea of intersectionality in our laws, there many a times Supreme Court has added this idea of intersectionality through its judgments. So there's a small image here according to the person who has given this idea. So mainly various identities comes and collides where it locks and intersects. You can take a screenshot of it and see how every identity will lead to the reality of a person's life. So this is an important case called Patal Jaman Wali versus State of AP in 2021. So in this case, a Dalit blind woman was raped and the case went to the court for trial, and the government court tried to lodge a complaint under SC and ST Atrocity Act, Prevention of Atrocities Act. But the court tells this law is not so widely defining the problems of a Dalit person. So it tells that what is the proof we have, or how do we prove that this woman was sexually assaulted just because she's a Dalit woman, and she was assaulted just because she's a woman. So many in the society really know that the three identities here, being from a lower caste, being physically challenged, and being from a weaker gender, the three sections have intersected to make the whole crime possible to be done by the perpetrator. So when identity of a woman intersects with her class, caste, religion, disability, and sexual orientation, she may face violence and discrimination due to two or more grounds. So court found it difficult to put challenges under SCST Act as it narrowly defines the offences and fails to apply this interconnectedness. Then how can we really provide justice to the woman in this case, right? So the next one here is again a judgment of the Supreme Court where it decriminalized section 377 of the article of the IPC, where it tells that we should go for a anti-discrimination code. This code should include intersectional analysis. So if you see, we have Article 15 Clause 1, which tells that no discrimination will be made on the ground only on religion, race, caste, sex, and place of birth. But if you see, there is a combination of all of them which work to make justice reach to the public to be impossible. Hence, we need to have an intersectional analysis which goes beyond what is mentioned in Article 15 Clause 1. At the same time, the court in its judgment on EWS, there were many dissenting judges in this case who told that the idea of EWS reservation applying only to general merit population and not to SC, ST and OBC is a violation of intersectionality principle being applicable. That is, if you recall, this EWS reservation is applicable only to poor people from general category or those who are non-SC, ST and OBC. But if you see, being poor plus being socially backward both these identities are making the life terrible for the lower sections of the society, then why are we not extending the 10% reservation to them? So if we are following intersectionality, it is this parameter also that needs to be considered, right? So if we talk about application of this intersectionality, how and why to do it, we can categorize it into the idea of laws needs to be made, in integrating intersectionality. So we can have a law which could tell that if it is a woman belonging to a Dalit community facing these kind of crimes, the punishments could be this. So the more the intersectionality applies, the more stronger should be the will to provide justice. This intention should be visible through our laws itself. And let's say if court most of the time should interpret the intersectionality in their judgments, but if they fail to do, the parliament should step in and take a broader note of a particular case. Just like we see, Supreme Court initial years were against reservation policy by having a narrow explanation of our right to equality. But Parliament amended the constitution and made room for reservation, keeping in mind the intersectionality as a concept. So do remember this as an example for intersectionality. At the same time, CEDAW, international organization which talks for women's rights, also tells that out of the seven pillars for women right, one of the pillars is application of intersectionality, right? At the same time, when we talk about LGBTQ community, we need to mention about Yogya Karta principles. Yogya Karta principles is about how human rights will be applicable to sexual orientation or gender identity. How will we apply human rights to them? In that perspective as well, intersectionality would be relevant. So if you see in the coming future, or we can tell in the conclusion that already intersectionality as an idea is universal or ubiquitous in international law, but India is yet to adapt it in law. And why it is very much needed in the coming days? Climate change is a challenge that will help impact marginalized society. AI driven job losses or job disruption is going to impact the marginalized society. So if we don't have a policy that is including the interconnectedness, we might not allow the justice to reach the last level. So remember, there was an essay that had come in this year itself about a society that is having justice need not have charity at all. So in these kind of essays, the idea of intersectionality would go a long way in improving the quality of your essay. So the next and an important article is a kind of value addition to your international relations topic, especially India and her neighborhood. It is called Unwrapping Pilgrimage Diplomacy, a New Front in the Neighborhood. So if you look, India China relations have slightly improved in the recent past because of the collaboration between the defense ministry. We have tried to take back our forces, or disengagement is going on in the Ladakh region, and it's a positive sign. But do you think it's going to happen in just a few weeks or months? This is a very long process, or there needs to be many negotiations, and by that time, we might be wasting a lot of time in improving the harms this kind of battle had brought between us. So, the author here was telling about building confidence between the two countries, or confidence building measures should be included in the gap. In simple words, increase people to people ties. So this is the first step in which we would like to improve our relations. And to utilize this, the author, it is an article from First Post, the author talks about using pilgrimage. That is the idea of religious tourism to boost the ties between the country. So where all this is coming from? This is coming from the idea of Tibet Agreement or Panchashil Doctrine, about which you already would have read in your IR topics. So Panchashil Doctrine talks about five principles to keep India's friendship with the neighborhood intact. And as all of us were part of a single subcontinent, our culture and religious identities keep moving from one place to another place. Hence, religious tourism has been a bond that has strengthened the neighborhood. So India has such religious ties with Bhutan, which was an age-old tradition, and this agreement or Tibet Agreement or Panchashil Agreement is nothing but giving a legal framework to this. This would make our relation very powerful, and also meaningful. It is giving us some meaningful way of connecting with each other. So we already have the example you would have seen here. It is with respect to India and Pakistan, the Kartarpur corridor. It is a significant idea of, we can say, mutual gesture of goodwill agreed upon the tough reality and differences. So the author gives three areas where we can explore this. One would be the Mansarovar Kailash Parbat tourism, pure crystal mountain tourism, and Sari Yatra. These two would be for Buddhist tourists. This would be for the Hindu pilgrims. So this idea would go a long way in increasing the ties. So you can use it in your answers as in what are the changing dimensions of India China relations, or how better can we strengthen the ties with the Asian giant. In such questions, remember the potential of pilgrim tourism. Fine. So the next would be with a question, because we have already completed a similar topic in the past two ICANN videos. I think, if I'm not wrong, it is the eighth video on which we have spoken about Mr. Revant Himmat Singha, who's popularly called as a food farmer. You can look into that video to be able to write a proper answer to this. So discuss the rising burden of non-communicable diseases in India, highlight the key factors contributing to this trend, and suggest comprehensive measures to address this challenge. We will not be discussing the complete idea for this question. You would be writing it yourself, but we will also give you what could be the extra points to be added in this. Okay, it's quite a generic topic, but try to add in these kind of current affairs to make it more interesting. So we are talking about the age of junk and why a turnaround is needed. So if you see, this article was there in Hindu's Text and Context, where a report has been published called Access to Nutrition in India. And this report is doing a small comparison of some 30 food and packaging industries. Sorry, food industry, basically food and beverage industry. So this food and beverage industries, there was a pattern observed where we have two type of countries. One is low and middle income countries, one is high income countries. So it is observed that these companies are selling less healthy products here, whereas in the high income countries they're selling more healthy or safer products. At the same time, even here there are healthy products available, but they are on a expensive note, bringing down their affordability. For example, you can give the Nestle's Cerelac that became very controversial very recently, right? So when this observation is made, why we are still not taking any measures, or what is the measures, or we can tell this could be a reason why Indian customers of late have become kind of addicted to packaged junk food, which in the long run impact the blood glucose level and also sodium level, or due to excessive consumption of added salt in them. So do we have any mechanism, or why is it significant for India? I think we already know the huge burden of obesity and other context for India. Please take the information from National Family Health Survey 5 with respect to obesity, and also with respect to non-communicable diseases. Make the statistics ready for your answer to be added in this part. Okay, so next is food package and labeling. India here is a member of World Health Assembly, and we have passed many resolution. One of the resolutions India has passed is resolution on marketing of foods and non-alcoholic beverages to children. So India, as of now, though we have certain label projects, that labeling that is going on through FSSAI, we have not been much serious about giving the awareness among the public as in why it is relevant to teach your children what healthy they are consuming or not. So if we don't mold the kids into good healthy habits in the childhood itself, it carries on into adult obesity, for leading to many non-communicable disease like cardiovascular diseases, cancer, or just diabetes, gestational diabetes, and all of them. So remember, this topic is going to be extremely relevant, as India has quite successfully conquered communicable diseases like malaria, Kala Azar, polio, and the others. The new battle that has stood before us is non-communicable diseases. So we'll go to the next topic. And India's obsession with tea and coffee. But now, unfortunately, we are having to have a dilemma to choose between trees or teas from the areas where the tea has converted the Nilgiris into green deserts. Okay, so what is the idea here? Some conservationists in the Nilgiri areas have been planting trees in all those areas, lands that have been degraded due to excessive tea cultivation, and this has taken off really well. The environmentalists are supported by Adivasis or local tribal population who have successfully replanted the area and converted or re-established the forest there. And what is the advantage of this? They have been able to revive many streams that were defunct earlier. Now the streams have water for 365 days, and because of this advantage, the species diversity is back. That is, instead of mono tree cropping, now we have multiple crops available there for animals, because of which species like elephants and gores have got back their home. This is on a positive note. So environmentalists feel that tea cultivation has converted the area into a desert due to excessive use of fertilizers, reducing the soil fertility, and they are not happy with the tea cultivation basically. But there's some sections of the society tell that it is tea that is the better source of occupation for them. So here they have a choice. For occupation, they can either cultivate tea or allow tourists, or allow both, which is going to be a disaster anyway. So the people tell here that for tourism we need many construction to happen. We need to change the we can talk about the geology of the location by constructing or creating plains to build, or a kind of urbanization trend will happen if tourism will prosper. But if tea cultivation is there, it's a safer and a better economic option than going for tourism. And this tea cultivation is a kind of occupation for 6 lakh people in the Nilgiri areas. Hence this is a better option, and we should not be hating the idea of tea cultivation here. So, who should win according to you? Is it the ecology who tells that tea cultivation is not good, or the economy which tells that poverty eradication is important? Yes, the answer here is sustainable development. Okay, remember this case study, it had come up in New Indian Express, where the district administration of Nilgiris has planned a way to bring peace for both of them, or finding a common ground for both. That is, planning on agroforestry. That is, instead of monocropping of tree shrubs, they would include the timber, which is woody in nature, so that the tree diversity will increase, retaining the birds and other population in the estates. And the second one is, using them will also increase the plant diversity in the area, bringing soil fertility back. At the same time, they're planning to go for a free zone, that is fertilizer free zone, which will bring back the fertility of the soil over long run. At the same time, they would put efforts for land restoration. So this is just a case study for you to remind that how this act of sitting and negotiating the issues would definitely give solution for every stakeholder who has a stake in conserving the forest, and also to protect their livelihood. So remember, these case studies can be added in your paper 3 conservation topic. Fine. So please answer the question that is given in the comment section. We would definitely respond to that. At the same time, stay tuned every morning at 9:30 a.m. from Monday for ICANN series, so that you also can have a dedicated time for note making and think over the topics or questions asked in this whenever you're reading the paper for the day, or while studying the other subject. Thank you so much for the support. Thank you once again.